All right, let's go. So welcome everyone to today's webinar about intranets. And I'm super happy to finally be able to do this webinar. And obviously it's not going to be me alone, but I'm so happy to be joined by Susie Robinson, who's a consultant at Clearbox today. Hi, Susie, how are you?
Hello, I am very good, thank you. I was being hypnotized by your holding image then. It was quite pleasant just to watch while everyone joined us.
Super cool. Susie, do you want to introduce yourself just quickly to the audience?
Yeah, so I'm Susie Robinson. I have been working with intranets and internal comms since about 2008. So I've had a lot of experience working as a practitioner, and I joined the dark side of consulting in about 2019, working for Clearbox Consulting, where I look after the suite of reports there, which I'll talk about in a moment.
Super cool. Thank you, Susie. I have actually started my career on the dark side, like you've mentioned it. So I started off as a consultant, doing similar things. I've accompanied many organizations on their way to better employee communications, more employee engagement. And after a couple of years, then joined the provider side. So now I'm the head of product marketing here at Haiilo. Super cool that so many of you made it today. So again, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining us today. We want this to be as conversational, interactive as possible. So Susie and I are going to be chatting around some themes and interesting topics, all about intranet, of course, but we obviously also interested in your thoughts, your questions. So feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function within the Zoom application, and we'll make sure to make some time at the end of the session to answer those as well. So Susie, tell us a little bit more about Clearbox. What do you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So we help businesses of all different shapes and sizes, primarily with intranet strategy help. We also look at the broader digital workplace as well, to try and see how different tools can align, particularly within internal communications. So that is strategy, as I've mentioned, but it's also things like governance, and maybe offering training for content authors, for example, and helping them write well for an intranet or even for a smaller screen. Everyone who works for Clearbox, of which there are 4 consultants, we all have practical experience, so we were all practitioners once upon a time, and we bring that very real world experience with us, so we understand how some of you may be feeling and thinking out there with some of the challenges that you face. We work in a very transparent way, so that's why Clearbox is called Clearbox. We like leaving people with the information they need to carry on once we've left and finished an engagement. And most importantly, we are vendor neutral. So whilst we will work with vendors like Haiilo, we will do things like these webinars. We don't have any partnerships or reseller agreements. So it means we can have very neutral conversations like this on a webinar, but also as part of our assessments that we do for our reports as well.
Speaking of which, because you truly are experts of the landscape, tell us a bit more about these reports and how many. Oh yeah, it's on the slide. 60 reports. Yeah. It's crazy what you're covering there.
Yeah, so it's 60 products roughly. So I think it's a little bit more than that now over these 2 reports, of which Haiilo features in both of them. We put in thousands of hours of research, not only over the years since we've been doing this. So I think the first one came out about 2016, which was just looking at SharePoint Intranet in a Box products, whereas now we've opened that up and we actually look at a broader range of products that we cover across these 2 reports. They are both entirely free to download. So if you go to clearbox.co.uk/reports, then you'll be able to download those now for free, with over 1,000 pages of reviews across both of them. And then we use this when we do our research for clients. So when we do our consulting, we'll draw on this research, but then do further research into more products. And so we have knowledge of probably about another 100 products on top of these 60 that we've reviewed. So yeah, it's a very large and very complex market that has evolved over the last few years for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And really appreciate from Speaking from a solution provider perspective, really appreciate the work that you do in there, and I can only underline that you definitely do a thorough review there. I think each and every year we spend like 3.5 hours on a demo plus back and forth before in between. So lots of work, but definitely worth it. So really cool. And we'll also make sure to share the link with all of you in the follow-up of the session. So you not only get the slides and the recording, but also the link to download the Clearbox report. Just quickly, and then we'll definitely jump into the topics for today. So for those of you who have not heard of Haiilo so far, we are one of those solution providers that does provide an employee communications platform, but also intranets. We're doing this for quite some time already. So we're around for more than 12 years. Super proud of lots of many clients out of so many different industries and sizes globally. And this is also what kind of brought us here in terms of having so much experience in terms of intranets and how they have evolutionized over the past decades, even not only years, but decades. I mean, they're around for so long already. So that's one of the first topics that I want to start to talk about with Susie. But then we'll take a little bit further. One of my favorite topics is to talk about different levels of communications and different channels and how they differ from each other, closed channels versus open channels. And yes, of course, we will be talking about Microsoft. Susie, you mentioned SharePoint already. I'll make sure to ask a couple of questions about SharePoint because I'm pretty sure from the audiences, there's many of them who have experiences. I'm not going to say good or bad, but experiences with SharePoint as well. But let's kick us off with the evolution of intranets. And I brought one slide for us with me to start with, Susie. And it's that one here. I think I've created that somewhat last year, and I really tried to think about what has happened to the landscape of not only intranets but employee communications, really, with those different meta trends that are influencing this market and this software category ultimately. So I always kind of say, remember the good old days when it was good enough to have an employee magazine and a static intranet. And then I also say, I don't remember them myself. I wasn't always too young back then. But yeah, that was obviously a decade that has changed completely. There was a huge trend for enterprise social networks in between, and all of those requirements that were expected out of employee communications as a function, but also from solution providers, just added up. So social is still a big thing, but nowadays those platforms have to be super strategic, and yeah, so many different requirements. So Susie, you did live through the static period. You told me. How have you seen this landscape changing, evolutionizing over the past decades?
Yeah, so I do feel super old, and for everybody else who feels super old right now, yeah. So I started working with intranets in about 2008, but I actually saw the company Intranet that I ended up managing before then, and it was incredibly clunky, incredibly slow, and built around a navigation that focused on departments. So you had to understand which department in the business I work for was responsible for which policies, what procedures, in order to find anything. And the search also only looked at like titles of pages, and so I could never find anything. So actually my first experience of intranets was very poor. Then when I started to add content on to give you some idea of the technology way back then, I had to load my news on in the reverse order of priority. So the lowest priority stuff I had to load on first, and some yeah, right. Some people, so I did that once a week, and some people in the business realized what I had to do, and so would wait until quite late on the day that I did it just to send me their news that was really important. It had to go out that week. There was no way it could wait another week, and so would force it in that higher up in that priority list that I had. So yeah, so things have changed a heck of a lot. So as you've said here, really, the social tools was one of the things that was introduced and helped to evolve the software that's available now. So that kind of first sparks of taking inspiration from social media that really was kicking off a few years before it went into intranet. So the fact people were using Facebook and similar tools and MySpace before that as well, that need, that desire to talk to people then moved its way internally into intranets and started to influence the way that software vendors built their platforms. Which then also influenced some of the other aspects that were connected to it. So things like search, for example, you couldn't just search for titles of documents anymore, or titles of pages. People wanted to be able to go and find old conversations or particular comments on documents as well. And so that kind of one word of social really did have a big ripple effect on the industry and the way that these tools worked, and has continued until now. Of course, also in this time, so in the early teens of kind of 2012 to 2015 is really when the smartphone revolution happened. So that's when people started to get essentially computers in their pockets. It's when people wanted to be doing things on apps, when a smaller screen experience and a simpler experience started to become more important. And so that, again, that kind of social media, the phone experience really was kicking in at that point as well. And again, influenced intranets and how they were built, the ways that they operated both on desktop and also on mobile. And then the pandemic, obviously we are all very familiar with it, did shine a light on the need for internal comms. I think that there have been some bad practices come back and some poor opinions of internal comms come back since the pandemic is slowly wrapping up. And internal comms maybe is being shoved out the way a little bit again in favour for other things. But I do think that internal comms was given a bit of an opportunity to show the good that it can do, that the intranets and mobile tools that exist as well we're really given an opportunity to show what they can do to improve engagement and keep people communicating and keep that sense of community built as well, which was really important when people felt so isolated during the pandemic. And I think that has sparked where we are now, which is seeing much broader tools for internal communicators being developed through these intranet solutions, with really broad omni-channel approaches being introduced, allowing internal communicators doing so much more across lots of different channels, but actually from one tool. And so rather than that goal of reducing the number of tools that end users were using, which happened in the kind of mid-teens, where there was a desire for an intranet to be a digital workplace and to do absolutely everything. I think that vendors have started to look at actually it's internal communicators and administrators that really want to be doing less, and so that reduction in tools has really been happening for them instead. So that's what I've seen anyway since I started back in the day, all the way to now.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up your last thought in a minute, but yeah, I think we can absolutely agree. We're happy that these static times are over. There's so much more cool ways to communicate internally in dynamic ways with so much more content types, etc. And yeah, also the social era was super interesting, accelerated a lot. That's about where I started in that space. Interestingly though, and that was one thought I wanted to add, the different companies that we work with still have different views on social. So I do still work for organizations that try to shy away from social and are still feeling not ready in terms of their corporate culture and employee engagement maturity in order to give that control away. that might be a big thing mostly, to allow social interactions, things like commons, communities, etc., etc. How do you see companies reacting to this, and how do you see companies differently integrating social or not?
It is still something that comes up. So with the clients we work with now, you're right, there are people who are afraid of opening the floodgates to having untethered comments all over the place and people sharing their opinions. But people will share their opinions, and you can run an annual employee survey and find something out far too late to really make a difference. In my opinion, social tools, whether that be comments or reacting on something, or social spaces, so actually places you can go and talk about things, are incredibly valuable. There's that sense of community that can be brought, the reinforcing of the culture of a business. So actually having social spaces on social topics, not just things that are business related, can reinforce the fact that the culture of your business is, hey, we're really open, we're happy for people to talk about whatever topics they want to. We welcome everybody of whoever you are into this business. And then, as I said earlier, that the comment side of things, actually allowing people to react to the information you're sharing, can be incredibly valuable, not only to gauge the kind of pulse of the organization and how they're reacting to a piece of news, but actually for you as an internal communicator, and how to maybe tweak the piece of news, or how to follow up with an FAQ, or if there's something that you feel that you've missed, or something that keeps coming up where people have misunderstood something, you can then plan something to reinforce your initial message, repeating your message, but also wording it in a slightly different way. So some things that I don't think that those who are afraid really think about the benefits of the social tools, but they can, if you use them well, if you respond to people, is a really important point. If you have a process in place where whoever posts a piece of news is knowing that they've got to respond to any comments and questions, and you build that two-way communication up and reinforce that process, it's incredibly valuable to the business.
Yeah, 100%. We're going to come back to this. I even brought a couple of examples of how this can help make communications much more transparent as well. I want to pick up what you said earlier, because I've also seen the market shifting a little bit, and that's not only our perspective, but also lots of our competitors having shifted their strategy a little bit in terms of past. So probably 5 years ago, everyone was still trying to build that one hub. And we still have so many clients that call their intranet hub. That kind of represents the one size fits all, single pane of glass idea. And we have really shifted away from that. We don't want our intranet solution to be an island. We really want to leverage multiple channels, and this is just matching reality, right? So employees nowadays are on so many different channels, and you will never, ever be able to bring them all into your intranet. That's a fact. And we have to deal with it, right? So you still have to make your job, though, and still are eager to reach employees with the message that you want to transfer. So our view on this is we will definitely still be the one place where you can curate, publish, and analyze your content in one place. But ultimately, when it comes to delivery and the consumer side, then we believe that employees have to be able to consume the content where they are, right? So that's the multi-channel aspect of the delivery of content. So employees should be able to consume company news in Teams completely. They don't have to be forced to go back to the internet. And that is specifically important when it comes to those top-down organizational communications, right? So they don't have to be forced to one channel. Susie, what's your view on that, and how do you see the provider landscape responding to that philosophy shift?
I think you're right. I think we'll come and talk about Microsoft tools a little bit later on, but with the pandemic came the explosion of Microsoft Teams and the increased pace of rollout for some businesses, where they absolutely had to just get it out there, and that's continued. People have continued to use it, or we're hearing more those businesses that didn't roll it out at that point are now rolling it out now. And so if someone is going to be working all day in Teams or in Salesforce or other tools, you're right, then they're not going to move to your intranet just because you want them to. It's not where they do their work. And we've seen other vendors, also considering that and also trying to reach multiple channels. So that omni-channel approach of sharing your news is absolutely something that we've seen. Something I will add, though, is that there is still value in bringing in external tools, so other business systems, where there are pinch points or tricky experiences with using other business systems, say, for example, viewing pay slips or something along those lines. If that is difficult for people to do in the tools that they're supposed to be doing it in, then there is absolutely value in the intranet doing that instead. For one thing, it adds a hook to your intranet to draw people into it, so that they then see your news and they see anything else that's kind of optional for them to view. But then it also improves their experience of using your business systems, your business tools, and is worthwhile bringing in and considering for that factor as well.
Yeah. 100% agreed. We can perfectly put that into perspective when we look at the different levels of communications, because that's essentially what I meant. When it comes to top-down communications, it really doesn't matter where employees consume content, but for certain use cases that sit on a different level, it absolutely makes sense to integrate more of those workflows, processes, etc., into the intranet. And that was the perfect runway for that topic. And let's jump directly into it. So I love that slide. It's one of my favorite slides. I could talk an entire hour about it. But just to give you an overview, these are obviously not, this is not exhaustive, but these are mainly the 4 levels of communication that we see in companies. Let's start from the bottom. So we all know we have our closest peers that we work on projects with, that we collaborate every day in our team, in our department. So these are typically what we then call team communications. It's all about responsiveness, interaction. It's typically the stuff that we do in Teams or Slack. And it's related to collaboration and teamwork. Then there is an area, and we're going to jump one level now, what is called organizational communication. That's typically what internal comms is all about, and that's probably something that we're all familiar with, right? That's the company news, HR news, CEO updates, these kind of classic top-down information that is existing in every company. And then there's public. And I don't want to talk about public today a lot, but the one area that from my point of view, companies tend to forget or not care about enough is the level in between. And that for me is the gold, where you can make so much things wrong or right, and you can accelerate things like knowledge management and transparent communication on that level, and that is operative communications. And I think, Susie, that is exactly the level that you meant as well a second ago when you said it is worth to integrate other processes to that, because that's about ad hoc processes, but also knowledge management, and that's also where communities would and the social part that we talked about would play.
And I completely agree with you. And actually, I think as hard as it is for an internal communicator to say, sometimes the organizational communications don't matter to our audience. They are kind of entirely optional, really, for someone doing their day-to-day job. And so they have to have a real reason to read it, particularly if there are problems with engagement across the organisation, for example. Having them spend time that maybe they'd rather be doing their day job instead of reading an organisational announcement can be hard. And so the way that I think about as you say, ignoring the public communications, but the other 3 is around that level of relevance to an individual. And whatever you can do to or with your organizational communications to make them as relevant as possible to someone will absolutely help with that kind of readership level and actually the operative communication. So those changes to a policy or procedure, or even just telling people that there's going to be an outage of a particular business system for a while, they're not the sexiest of communications, but they are very practical, and they absolutely are relevant for certain individuals, or maybe even the entire business as well. And so prioritizing those kinds of communications may feel a little bit strange, but actually if you can make your intranet, particularly on a homepage, very practical and allow and make people understand that they will be told really important, vital, relevant things when they go and look at it, they will also then see those maybe more organizational communications that are more optional, those things that are for engagement, that are for reaching out certain messages. So completely agree with your diagram, what you've just said there, Kevin.
Yeah, and it's part of our product strategy here as well. So yes, like I said, we want to be the place where you curate and create your content, and then you can distribute it out to multiple channels. So that's to cover organizational communications. But Haiilo also intends to be the platform for operative communications, for your employees to share knowledge, to come together in communities. Because I truly think it does make a difference if you do such things in an intranet in an open and transparent way, versus if you try and cover operative communications in closed channels like Teams or Slack. And I've brought an example with me. These are screenshots out of our own version of our intranet. So we're using Haiilo ourselves as well, of course. And let's look at that post from my ex-colleague Christian here. He posts, so the way how Haiilo works is that you have pages for each department, etc., etc. And all of those posts are then globally curated on a timeline, right? And my friend Christian here, he had a question regarding something, and he even tagged me, right? So he knew that I was probably the person who would answer that question. So he could also just have sent me a message on Slack, because that's what we use for one-to-one conversations. And he could have got that answer, but he didn't, because there might be so many other people having the same question. So I responded transparently, publicly on the timeline of that post, so that everyone else could also benefit from my answer. Right? And if you think of the different use cases, how often that may happen in your organization, how often the same questions are being asked in closed channels like one-to-one chats or via WhatsApp, which does play a role. Think of the amount of time that gets lost and the potential that you would have to accelerate transparency and knowledge sharing if you would do that in an open way.
Businesses are full of people with an incredible amount of knowledge each. And when that person leaves the business, they take that knowledge with them. And so building communities of knowledge or communities of practice where people can ask open questions like that, get answers from experts, have processes documented, or maybe even allow you to then see maybe where there's a gap in what you have documented, or where someone is or groups of people are confused about a message that's gone out, again is an incredibly valuable addition to an intranet. So from that social side, but even just thinking about that kind of top-down communication, those sorts of things where there's going to be an outage on Salesforce for 4 hours while they do an upgrade. That might be something that would have been shared over email, maybe to an outdated list of people. But if it's something that's shared on an intranet with a particular audience targeted, then it's something that they can go back and refer to. It would be there on an intranet, on a homepage somewhere for them, potentially, depending on how you set it all up. And again, that relevance, that this is really relevant to me, I need to know this, is how they'll start to feel about an intranet. And you can really make use of that for your then kind of less formal, or not less formal, sorry, less kind of operational communications as well.
Yep. And what this then also allows, and I'm a big fan of that term, is if you curate content in that way and you then have it in a feed, you will allow users to scroll through a feed and also bump into something that they weren't necessarily looking for, but is still valuable. And that is kind of described with the term serendipity. So an unplanned happy discovery almost sounds romantic, but it certainly is. And that's what I meant with the gold on that level of communication. If you allow employees to, first of all, consume content like they're used to, because we're consuming content by scrolling on LinkedIn and Instagram, all of us are doing it. If you allow your employees consume the way, your company content like that, you'll naturally have more engagement. That's number one. And you'll also allow serendipity, right? So you will allow more transparency per default if you allow that open way of communications. Cool. That was a hard cut, but probably the hook that I would make is that with a Microsoft product, I would have a hard time to find a place where this kind of communications is possible. Well, there's good things on the way with Viva, I gotta say, even though I haven't seen it rolled out anywhere yet at sort of enterprise scale. But let me roll the dice into your direction, Susie. You obviously also look at Microsoft very closely. How do you see them influencing the market? And take this question directly. Are they soon to be ruling it all in employee comms and intranets?
So I would agree there are interesting things on the horizon with the Viva suite. So what I think so Microsoft did a fantastic job of marketing. If you want to take some inspiration if you work in marketing as well, external comms as well, then just reflect on what they did, because they launched Viva and didn't really say what it was going to do or how it would work, but it would solve all of these problems. And people still think that it's one single product that's new. But what it really is several different groupings of tools, some of which are part of your licensing if you have Microsoft 365, some of which aren't and are additional costs. So something like Viva Topics, which helps with categorization and tagging and finding and sharing that kind of stuff. And so people are confused still, I think, about what's coming out. I think the next few years are going to reveal some interesting things with Microsoft, and if they get it right, then they could dominate for a little while in the way that they did with social tools. So Yammer they bought Yammer in about 2012, I think it was, so right near the beginning of that social phase we were talking about earlier on, and it was them buying that also helped tip vendors into thinking, oh, we really need to have a Yammer complement or our own version of Yammer within our products so that people don't use Yammer, basically. So that helped influence the market. And so what we're seeing now is those Viva-esque tools being replicated in other solutions. So Microsoft absolutely influence the intranet market, in my opinion. They start trends, they start the ball rolling with certain functionality that people want to see in their intranets. And so other vendors then kind of emerge tool sets from that. That being said, they didn't call the market. They were very popular in the market with Yammer when they bought it for a while, and then that did dissipate. And SharePoint has been around since the early 2000s. So even before my time with intranets, SharePoint has been around, and it has had gaps in all that time. there have been things that are clunky or don't quite work, or where they've promised things and there have been developments and it's not quite lived up to expectations. And so for me personally, the jury is still out as to whether Microsoft really are going to corner the market, because I still think there will be gaps, particularly in the early years of Viva, and there still will be things that businesses want to do that Microsoft can't offer, or it will still be something where you need a Microsoft 365 developer or a SharePoint developer or someone in-house or a partner to actually make these things work. And for a lot of businesses, including the businesses I used to work for, that wasn't really a thing. As an intranet manager, I was also an internal comms manager. I had to do both, and I worked with IT to help get things fixed in the background and sort out things like security and have those kinds of conversations with vendors. But I didn't want to be fiddling around with really fine-grained configuration to get things working. I just wanted to go in and do my job. And so I think if Microsoft sort that out, it will become an even bigger product than it is now, but they haven't done that so far. So again, for me personally speaking, not on behalf of Clearbox, for me personally, I'm still waiting to see them completely figure out what they're doing and completely fix all of the problems that have been there for years now.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, ultimately, like you said, they've done a great marketing job, right? But if you look at it, it's still all based on SharePoint. It's all based on Yammer. We just added things on top that look nicer, at least in the demos. But I don't want to go into Microsoft bashing at all. That's not my intention here. Yet there is many companies that, even though, like you said, there's much more IT involvement needed, and et cetera, there's many companies that say we have a Microsoft only strategy. Probably that's not driven out of comms departments, rather out of IT departments. But there's a lot of companies that say that. What would you tell them in your role as a consultant, Susie? What's the added value of an intranet next or on top of Microsoft 365?
So I think the comms tools that we've been talking about is certainly a gap that Microsoft has. So that omni-channel approach that we're seeing more of. So being able to publish to digital signage or configurable newsletters, so something, a newsletter you can actually build rather than just a digest, even posting out to all those different solutions. So yes, into Microsoft Teams would be an example that Microsoft could or should be able to do, but actually beyond that, so going into Slack or going into Salesforce or those other business systems would need a decent amount of configuration, probably by an IT expert, in order to make that happen. Whereas a lot of the products that either sit on top of SharePoint or alongside it, or maybe are completely independent from it and may just draw in SharePoint libraries, they will bring those sorts of values and that simplified admin experience. So for someone who doesn't publish news very frequently, having a tool like Haiilo or some of the others that we've covered in the report, they're just much easier to pick up every so often, and configure your section of the intranet and tweak it slightly because you want to, without feeling like you're being overwhelmed with tools. So what I would say for those of you who are thinking about what your future looks like across these kinds of tools is to really think about what is it your business needs. Don't think about what tools you have in place right now too much, or don't get distracted by that. Really think about where are your gaps, what are your problems you're trying to solve, and how could you solve that either with Microsoft by itself or maybe with an additional product, or two or several, whatever it needs to be depending on the size and complexity of your business, just to draw some of those things together. It's just because you have it, it doesn't mean it's automatically your best solution. And there are all sorts of things you need to think about, including user research, before you can actually make that decision sensibly.
Absolutely, that sounds like a wise advice. So just a quick reminder to our audience, we're about to wrap up our conversation here, but if you have questions, feel free to paste them into the chat or the Q&A function, and Susie and I will pick them up in a minute. I just wanted to bring up that slide here because it's a good summary of what we've been talking about and how we are envisioning employee communications platforms, intranets to play that role, especially when it comes to top-down communications. So we've been talking a lot about multi-channel, so the push aspect that we can see at the bottom of this, right? Susie, you mentioned email, digital signage, obviously the intranet, the employee app itself, but also then the collaboration world with Slack and Teams. One aspect we didn't cover today, but also something I see highly up and rising is the mix, internal and external, or mixternal. Heard that term this week the very first time. So that's also something that I can see playing bigger roles in internet platforms going forward, and also pulling, right? Because we've mentioned there's probably so many different tools in digital workplaces that have all dedicated use cases, but also maybe existing content. So there might be companies that want to pull content from other places as well, and then just use the internet for top-down communications as a boilerplate to centralize it, plan it, and then again push it out to where employees are. Whilst at the same time, let's not forget that be the one place where employees can still come together more on an operational level of communications. Susie, have you seen and heard pull playing a role in your conversations as well?
Yes, it's starting to come up a little bit more frequently now, I think, and a little bit of pull and push actually with things like employee advocacy. So bringing in externally shared particularly social media posts, and then allowing people to push those out. So that's coming up. But certainly this picture is something that I'm starting to see more of across more products, and then with analytics behind the scenes as well. Which is where a lot of the value lies, actually. It's hard to work out ROI of communications, and it's an area of weakness that I've talked about many times before across the intranet industry, where it's quite commonly the one of the weakest scoring aspects of our reports actually is the analytics. But we're seeing vast improvements in that now in recent years as vendors are looking at this push and pull need of communications and what reporting is needed for people to be able to draw conclusions from what they're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Before we're running out of time, and I can see a couple of questions in the Q&A already, I wanted to quickly summarize the different aspects that we touched upon, and probably there would be so much more to talk about. You just brought up analytics. We didn't talk about mobile and frontline at all today. Maybe we can chime that into the Q&A. We'll see. But let's summarize the topics that we indeed have been talking about. So one thing that I'd like to highlight is that's the social aspect that we've been cheering for, the both of us. One thing that we've learned is that the higher adoption rate you have, the higher engagement you will also have in your platform. And that can only come if you allow employees to have more open and transparent communications, or even then have communications around different topics that are not necessarily business related in running groups or other sorts of communities of practice, communities of interest. Push and pull just came up, but especially we've been talking about the push element and the kind of philosophy change of intranets, not trying to be the hub and the one size fits all platform at all costs, but really trying to open up, not being an island anymore, and reaching employees where they are so they can consume the content you create on the channel that they prefer. And finally, we've covered Microsoft, and we've definitely seen lots of things coming, and there's certainly more to come on the horizon. But if we look at it nowadays, there's definitely gaps that we see that you cannot necessarily cover with the Microsoft landscape alone, and that's definitely something where intranets are going to play a role for the next couple of years, if not longer. And ultimately, and you just mentioned that, Susie, and I do agree 100%. It's something that I think communicators have to do more and spend more time on. It's success management, success measurement. And to me, this is kind of a combination of the analytics aspect you mentioned. In order to measure success, you need better analytics, but you need also more qualitative data, which is something that we also try to bring into the mix with surveys, so that you can ultimately combine reach metrics with impact metrics, and these two combined, from our point of view, kind of make the ROI of communications. And I definitely see not only us, but also other providers, other insurance providers going into that direction. Right, so that you ultimately already would be in a position for your intranet to be the most strategic IC tool in your digital workplace. And if it's that not yet the case, hopefully you'll be able to get to that state soon, either by using a platform like Haiilo or one of the great other tools out of the ClearBox report, also by the help of Susie and the guys from ClearBox. Susie, anything you would want to add to the summary? And whilst you're doing that, I'll dig out some questions.
So yeah, the only thing I would add is there are different approaches that you can take depending on what intranet tool you do have. So a lot of you may have Haiilo already, and that's why you're here, is you're a customer of theirs. If you're not, and you're wondering how you can do some of these things, there will be widgets, and there will be web parts, and there will be ways for you to design your homepage so that it absolutely meets the needs of your users. So think about your navigation design, think about your homepage design, so that it covers off what you want to do as a communicator, but also some of those things we were talking about, those relevant comms, those practical comms, the social aspects. Just think about how you can draw those through onto your homepage as well, because there will be ways to do it. So it's not just all top-down organizational comms, or just a host of buttons. Just think about how you lay out your homepage to address all those different needs.
Cool. All right, we have 2 or 3 questions. Let me read them out, and the first one I'll give to you, Susie. How do we make our HR folks convinced that effective employee communication is also equally important? There is enough focus and energy on training and talent retention, but nothing on improving communication.
So there are ways to tie those things into what you do with internal communications and with your intranet. So there are ways to join up talent retention, for example, with things you can do on your intranet. So reinforcing your company culture through an intranet is one way of doing that, for example. So what I said earlier about having those spaces where people can go and talk, where people can ask questions openly, that reinforcing of that culture is going to be a huge help. And also thinking about maybe some of you have had this experience, I certainly have, where you've gone through a recruitment process with your new company. You've used a fantastic external website, you've had a great recruitment process, the communication has been fantastic. You start your first day and you look at something that looks like it's been created 20 years in the past and dragged through a bush on its way to you, and you're just plopped in front of a laptop, or even not even in front of a laptop, you're shown someone's laptop as they're giving you some sort of awkward induction on your first day, and then you're just kind of expected to start reaching out and get on with it. So actually thinking about people's very first experiences with your company on your intranet with your digital tools is a great way to retain talent, because if they have a brilliant initial experience, they're much less likely to think early on, oh, I don't think I've made the right decision, because some of those decisions are made very early in someone's employment history. And so there are ways, and in fact I'll share a link with the Haiilo team to a blog post I wrote about this, particularly on talent retention and internal comms, but there will be ways for you to link the things that are important to them with things you can do on your intranet. And so you can tie in, you don't have to convince them in a way, you're just reinforcing what they're already doing, and communications is kind of just comes along for the ride with that. And you can reinforce some of what you're talking about with saying, oh, we could make sure we automatically send a message after this amount of time, someone being in the business, or if we want to make things a lot more open, then let's try and get the leadership involved with doing regular communications, because then people will see their faces and see their involvement. So there will be ways for you to join those dots between what they're interested in and what you can do, and then drag internal comms along with it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. HR definitely is a super important stakeholder, and ultimately one that should adopt and use the intranet the most within an organization, because there's so much that they can do for their purposes. And onboarding, I would absolutely agree, is a super important use case, or even pre-boarding, and something that some of our clients do, invite new colleagues before they even join into the intranet, so they get to know a couple of colleagues already, they can connect, maybe download a couple of documents, etc. A super cool use case once it's implemented. There's another question, and there it is. I knew it would come up. We don't have to artificially bring it up, Susie, with the frontline topic. Here's a question. Can you expand on how to use an intranet to push information to people on channels where they are? Over 70% of our workforce in the field are not always in front of a computer.
So when employee app products first really started to emerge, which is only about 5 years or so ago, there was a lot of resistance across companies of encouraging people to bring their own devices. But I would say that is less of a concern now. It is still a concern, and people are quite right to say, no, I'm not using my own device to look at these sorts of things. But I also think that people are so used to downloading apps to do absolutely everything with now, that workforces are happier to download an app if they have a reason to. So I think pushing communications out, you absolutely need to, and again, that culture point to make sure people are informed and to bring people into the business, improve employee engagement. Yes, absolutely, that's important. But it is those hooks. It's those things that your field workers really care about that you need to make sure are present in your app. If that is something like viewing a payslip, if it is booking time off when they're on the bus on the way in, or sitting on the sofa with their partner, so when they're talking about booking holidays, if it's clocking into a site, so there's some sort of geolocation set up so they can clock in as soon as they arrive using their phone. Anything that will make their lives better, or even digitize a process. So I know of a use case of a transport company in the UK who introduced a mobile first solution for all of their drivers. And they saw something like a 40% increase in the number of near-miss reports that were made because the form had been moved on to the app. It wasn't because there were more near misses happening, it's because the process was so much easier for people to complete. They were doing it on their phone when they got back to they're making a cup of tea, basically stood there and filled it in. So figure out what people are struggling with, what would make their lives easier, how you can digitize maybe something that's really old-fashioned in your workplace, introduce those and add communications on top, and you should build something that would make them tempted to download it. And that's the hook again. It's kind of, again, bringing internal comms along for the ride with sorting out those other things and understanding that need amongst your workforce.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to add, it's definitely those processes and those hooks. But I think even better is if you will be able to find topics and actually create content, internal comms content around the topics that those folks are interested in, right? Because they typically, like Susie, you said that perfectly earlier, typically they're not interested in the CEO blog and the organizational top-down communications. It's not something they would read. So figure out what they were interested in and try to create content around that. And maybe also in a different kind of tonality. That's also something that with the likes of ChatGPT, we're now playing around with how can you change tonality for different audiences to make it even more appealing, etc. So just to add that, there's also other hooks than just by integrating those processes, or the classic one, the canteen menu. I don't want my frontline employees to only download my employee app because that's the only way they can access the canteen menu. Right. And finally, the employee app is one channel, but ultimately digital signage would be another one, right? So it's not that interactive. I know you wouldn't be able to kind of gauge engagement, but ultimately it is just for the purpose of top-down communications, another channel where you would be able to reach those people in the field. All right, we do have time for that one question that just came in, Susie. How do we arrive at ROI for internal communication? I'm interested to hear your first thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it's an eternal question, which I have had myself and seen posed for a long time. I would say how to gauge it there isn't necessarily a single formula, a single answer. In the way you have to do the research to work out what it is your business needs, to work out what tool your business needs, work out what questions you're trying to answer. So there will be some big questions that you're trying to solve or want to pose with some of the things you're doing with your intranet. So it could be with your communication, sorry. So it could be about improving engagement, or it could be again about improving a process. There will be ways of following those big questions down and breaking them out and thinking about, well, how can we figure out if people have understood this change of a process, and the best way to do that is to see that people are adopting that process. And maybe there's a new form that's being filled in, or maybe you've introduced a new way of covering an employee survey. So you're seeing an increase in the number of people who are filling it in. It's those sorts of measures that you can take and turn into your ROI. For me, when I was a practitioner, one of the big ones, which is, it seems like such a small thing, I worked for a retailer, and the flagship store in the middle of London was huge and was so big and so popular, it could kind of get away with doing its own thing. In most cases, they did what they thought was best because they were the flagship, and kind of led the way for a lot of other stores of who wanted to kind of take a similar stance as them. But they still had to follow certain processes, and over time they had invented their own, and they weren't necessarily doing the things that they should. And when I relaunched the intranet, we completely rewrote all the health and safety content. So it had been written by a health and safety person in health and safety legal language that was completely impenetrable, and people never really read it. So I worked with them and we completely rewrote it, made it human language that people would understand. And one of the processes that we finessed and reworked was the bomb threat process. And it wasn't long afterwards, it's just a few months later, there was a bomb threat in this flagship shop. And they went onto the intranet, found our policy, were able to read it in that really stressful time and follow the guidance there, reported the incident, and also had to write up what had happened, everything, and had written this in their formal report. back to health and safety for police and everything. So it was one piece of feedback, but all of that context was so important. It showed how important having rewritten these processes and policies were. And so look for things like that as well as numbers, because it will be those things for your business that will matter and mean something to the people who are listening, and will have a lot more impact than trying to work out what a benchmark figure against a similar business of your size, etc., would be. So really think about what you are measuring as a business and your anecdotal feedback, and take all of those things.
Super cool story. I bet you could make a good business case out of that. Just one thing I'd like to add, because this is a slide I had in another deck. So when I try to think about the ROI of internal comms, we also, and I mentioned it earlier, always try to think about reach metrics, so the more obvious things, but then also impact metrics. So maybe try and think about how are you influencing metrics like strategy comprehension, and then start measuring that. For example, with the help of pulse surveys, or also metrics like trust and leadership. If you can tie your communications or your intranet platform to those kind of metrics, you can definitely make very strong business cases and very strong ROI argumentations for your leadership out of that. All right, Susie, it's been an hour. It's crazy how fast that has passed, and we could have gone on and on. I'd really like to thank you. I enjoyed our conversation so much. There's been people having dropped out already, but still, for those of you who are still here, thank you so much. I had so much fun. We will definitely, like I mentioned at the beginning, follow up with the slides, the recording, and also share the couple of links that we mentioned. In the meantime, Susie, any departing words?
No, I think that's everything. Please, if you are thinking about new technology, you can go and read about Haiilo in our reports, and they are free to download. So even if you just want some inspiration, then you can go and have a look at them and see if you can figure out something new for your existing intranet as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.